Hi, thank you, and welcome to my channel. This is just what I like to call Bijou's 2 cents. I'm just going to give a quick commentary on certain things that I feel is necessary to comment on. It might seem random to you because my channel is a spiritual channel, but I promise you I'll tie it all together in a spiritual way. Which, anytime I say spiritual and spirituality, for me, it's always about digging to that authentic core version of you, in all honesty, and not thinking about it in a traditional sense and what everybody else deems as spiritual. So let's get to talking about this idea of colorism and what's been going on in our community, because it is uh, another leg to so-called white supremacy, and it has been institutionalized in ways where people aren't even aware that they are either a victim of it or they're victimizing other people of it. And it has caused a lot of confusion amongst ourselves, amongst our own visions of ourselves and how we uh, navigate our identity. It's like when you think about what it means to be black, those lines have been very, very blurred. And what I mean by that is that, generally the black community typically accepts everybody as its own. We include anybody as family if you can acknowledge us. And that is a psychological breakdown of how we have been traumatized in as a whole, as a community, and disparaged in the media, socially, economically. All these things have tied into this. But when you think about it, the fact of the matter is that when you have people who are miscegenated, mixed, biracial, they're able to fit in. If they're mixed with black, they're able to, quote unquote, black. I'm just using that word casually because these social constructs are just that. They are social constructs, and it's meant to siphon spiritual energy from a group of individuals who actually have it. And we'll get to those details momentarily because this is important. See, when you have individuals who are soul beings, who have more than spirit, you have soul. And you have individuals here who have just spirit, they're not soul beings. Everything has to be siphoned from the soul beings for them to operate, to exist. So there has to be psychological programming against those who have souls to say you are less than yourself. So you can give up that energy to those who don't have it. You understand? So now, turning back to this colorism situation, this is a way where people are able to just kind of like not even look at themselves and love themselves genuinely. And then we are faced with people elevating others amongst themselves who favor or who symbolize or look like or can amalgamate into quote unquote whiteness and white society. This is a psychological disorder and a disadvantage that we have been placed in as a community, and we can see it in how every time we put um, someone black in the media, if it's a black woman, it's usually someone who is mixed, has a mixed phenotype. You can see the variation of ethnicities in that individual. You can tell that that person is definitely doesn't have at least three black grandparents. Okay, you can see that in most of the people that they perpetuate as black in society or in the media. There's a reason for that too, and we'll get to that. But the fact of the matter is that the idea of blackness is has been categorized to make people to feel ashamed, make people to feel less than themselves in terms of how society treats us. But it's up to us to change that as our own individual selves, to change how we view ourselves and not allow these ideologies and concepts to regulate who we are anymore. And I'm seeing these things happening as we, as a people, are trying to solidify our identities and just come into our own power. It's like the energy of the soul energy is starting to gravitate back to the individuals it belongs to, because we're in a timeline where everything has shifted. Okay, so this is where that spiritual channeling comes into play. So if you are tapped in to the frequency, you can feel things are shifting, and you can look at the world and see what's happening. And what has happened is that there has been a grave sin committed against, atrocities committed against people on the planet, of course, who are the original people of the planet. And we know this. And people who are complicit in that, they want to hide that. They want to hide their hand. They want to forget about it. They don't want to remember it. And they don't want the descendants of those people to remember it or hold them accountable. So that energy that has been stolen, that has been siphoned and continuously tries to be siphoned through all these different metaphysical techniques of putting people in front of you, telling you that these are your people when they're really not. They have no heart for you. A lot of the times, people who are positioned to, they're like Trojan horses, because they know that they have advantages in that society above those who are underrepresented, and they allow themselves to be put on a pedestal. And these people are not, they're just as complicit. So what I mean when I'm saying all of this is that the energy is starting to return to those it belongs to. And there's no stopping that, because those people, my people, myself included, we are awakened to our memories. We're up. We're remembering who we are. We're remembering what we deserve. We also remember those generational traumas that was inflicted on our ancestors. Me, in particularly, waking up was quite a task to do when I had to navigate through all of the pain of my forefathers, my ancestors, settling their energy, giving them peace for all the ass whoopings they got for nothing. You understand? How can you, when you're doing magic and you're doing this kind of ancestral work, when you have ancestors that went through brutal rapes, brutal traumatizing events, how can one reconcile that energy within themselves, because it's in your blood, right? And then you have to make peace with that. How can you make peace with that when there has never been any justice, right? Okay. This is what we're coming to. We're in a state, in an age where justice has to come. And people who have been complicit now, if we are our ancestors, they are their ancestors too. You understand? And no one wants to take accountability for the past, but we are still paying for the past as well in the present, in terms of how systematically things have been set up, how we have been shut out of businesses in ways that our counterparts in life has been able to set up shop. I've even watched certain people who have so-called clues to why so-called black people are in the state of suppression that we are, such as you could take a look on the internet and see a lot of people, and you may think they're conspiracy theorists or not, but they talk a good points. And there was one person my cousin sent me one time. I don't really know his name, but these people who are into Moorish science and stuff, and the guy, he was pretty harsh in his analysis. However, it opened my eyes to how people look at us as a community and as a whole. And he said something that just kind of didn't sit well with me, when he said that everybody's in on the ruse, because blackness is more or less like a judicial classification. We are sitting here claiming and, connecting to something that was meant to keep us in a specific socio-economic energy where everyone can come and pocket off of us as long as they cater to our ignorances, and keep us ignorant as well. And 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 he was pretty harsh in how he analyzed how ignorant we are when we are made to be ignorant. We're bred to be ignorant in a situation where if it's us understanding the letter of the law is made so complicated that the average person won't be able to just pick up that law book and decipher those codes. Come on now, let's get real. When you have all these different societies and all these different peoples who are complicit in just saying we're going to target this group of people, keep them at the bottom, keep them socially, economically challenged, and keep them where they are so we can make money off of them. And then money is also spiritual energy. Let's get real. That's why when I do things, if I'm doing things directly for you, you're going to have to pay me because you're tapping into my spiritual energy. So there's got to be an exchange. And we choose to use currency as a form of exchange of energy that is also tapping into the soul and life force. So when you to the real meat and bones of this situation, you have a spiritual energy that has been raped. And I feel like we shouldn't be afraid to say the truth of what it is. And people who are just trying to hide the past so that they can get on with the future, you can't really do that when there's energy blocking. Literally, when you think about physical energy and how you clear it metaphysically, it becomes stagnant. And all that we see, the chaos that's going on in the world, it's because of that energy stagnant. It's very stagnant on this planet. When you have certain places where people were just traumatized and beaten, and then you have sacred, and it becomes like hollow ground because these people died there, and then there's no one there to do the cleansing, no one clearing their energies, no one giving them peace, and they're all standing on top of us in purgatory, still here. You got these shadow people all over the world, people having all these paranormal encounters and stuff. Why is all of that happening? Because there is no peace amongst the ancestors who still roam these lands, and the lands that of the people who they really truly belong to, right? It's an arrest. It's not arrested. And then you have other people who are complicit in saying that they are the identities of the people who were originally here when they really weren't, when they are still people who are just admixture people, right? So this is actually something that has been orchestrated, and I have proof in research, yes, but also there is this one particular um, I want to say thesis, it looks like, that I discovered online, and I will share this with you guys, and I'm going to read it to you. A couple pages here. It's called Blurring the Lines of Race and Freedom, Mulattoes in English Colonial North America and the Early United States Republic. This is by Aaron B. Wilkinson, and I'm reading this only for commentary purposes. And I really want you to understand the ideology behind the mulattoes and why, most people who are, and it's not no dad did dig at biracial people. My grandmother on my dad's side, she's actually considered mulatto. They are Creole people of New Orleans, so they are mostly like biracial people, right? Um, but the idea and the society that bred that type of mentality to make a person want to not mate with their own kind, it came through colonization. It came through the brutality. It came through the favoritism that happened with how white society props up and elevates and allows success for those who are more acceptable in their society, or those who look more like them, and it's more tolerable. And that is the underlying psyche that we have here in America and globally too. We don't really like to acknowledge that, but it is the truth. And also, I will read through this, and I will also prove how society is trying to cover its tracks even in real time. I will say I will show that to you guys. So let's get started here. We'll just read the introduction. Since its earliest days, the United States has had a racial system largely based on the black white binary. The various groups, such as Native Americans, Latinos, Asians, and others, have long complicated the binary over the years. The idea of monoracial categories has dominated racial thinking throughout United States history. However, an increasing number of people in the 21st century United States are recognizing their mixed ethno-racial heritage and are choosing to personally identify themselves as having multiple ethno-racial ancestries. Some have tied this trend to a multiracial baby boom that resulted from an increase in so called interracial marriages in the decades that followed the height of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Excuse me. In 1967, the Supreme Court decision in Loving versus Virginia struck down all state anti-miscegenation laws or legislation that prohibited interracial marriage. In the following decades, mixed heritage families flourished, and their children having grown up in communities that are largely accepted of racial integration. Arguably, this lack of outwardly restrictive legislation, coupled with more tolerant views of racial integration, have allowed children of mixed heritage to become more comfortable identifying with more than one racial category. In the 21st century United States, it has largely become socially acceptable to identify oneself as mixed, and as one should. I would say that most people, uh, in these days, and in what I've been able to witness, I've seen a lot of people be forced to identify as black because the other cultures do not accept them. So that's not all the way accurate. Most people feel pressured into identifying solely as black, and he will get into that with this reading here as well, because it will detail as to how it all even started back during colonial days. So this, and I will bring it all and tie it all back to the spiritual siphoning of energy as well, because we do have to establish why it was institutionalized in the first place. Okay. All right. So many multi-ethnic families welcome the 2000 United States federal census, which allowed parents to mark one or more racial box for their children and presented everyone with the option to identify with multiple ancestries for the first time in the United States history. Several years later, many of these families joined millions of others who championed in 2008 election of Barack Obama, the first United States president of African descent, born of Kenyan father and a European American mother. While growing up, Obama was haunted by fears of racial belonging due to his mixed ancestry. In Dreams of My Father, Obama recounts the feeling that he didn't belong somehow and would forever remain an outsider with the rest of the world. Black and white always standing in judgment. Similar to other people of mixed ethno-racial ancestry, he too struggled with racially tinged questions: who was I and where did I belong? The young Obama emerged from his crisis of identity as an African American, and his personal journey later became the subject of national debate. During his election inauguration and tenure as 44th President of the United States, many asked if Barack Obama should be considered the first American president or the first multiracial president of the United States. But most people consider him the first black president. Let's just be honest. Most European Americans don't look at him as being white. They look at him as being black. Let's just be real, right? Many people look at biracial people and just see blackness. Why is that? Why can't they just be who they are? For for Americans, mixture, it's a reason, and we'll get to that. For Americans, mixture with ethno-racial groups has always been a complex issue. Their history in the United States and preceding English colonies evokes a past marked by various systems of racial oppression. First with slavery, then with Jim Crow segregation, and today under expanding penal system. During the height of Jim Crow in the 20th century, people of African descent in the United States were labeled under the monoracial category of black, according to the one-drop rule. Here we go. Where a person presumed to have a descendant from at least one traceable African ancestor is considered to be fully black, color, or Negro. See, that's that racial divide right there. Where in looking at the psychology of it, they're saying one person in your family, let's say if you have that great grandmother that's black, you could claim blackness. And phenotypically and genetically, you can be white, but still claim black and be fully black. And this is where that comes from, right here. And this is why we need to stop this in terms of when people are trying to search for their identity. We have to allow people to regulate that, not society. And society are really it really had a hand in not allowing people who has multi ethnicities to feel comfortable and confident in that enough to stay in their lane of multiracial identities and forcing them to choose one. And in that, it undermines those who are fully that. Because now in those groups, they're looking at those people and seeing that how they get the favors, they get positions better in society, they get propped up and they get elevated. Male or female, it doesn't matter. We're not going to even go in the realms of how black men, prop up mixed biracial women more than they do their own. And many black women are going to start doing that as well. And I think that that's also something that is kind of socially engineered as well, through how we constantly see the ideas of beauty, even amongst our own community. It's always a mixed identified or someone who looks ambiguous the that was the image of beauty. And we can just go down that history list, look at through Ebony magazine from the 60s to present, and see how they marketed self-hate to our darker skinned black women, so they didn't see the beauty in their skin. How they market texturism, so that when we started to see the beauty in our hair. I don't even like saying 4C, 4A, because then it still puts us at the end. Why are we doing this to ourselves? Right? Why is the first number one is the straightest? 1A is the European hair. You see, even that is psychologically damning yourself, right? I don't even identify with that stuff. But when you have your hair is as coily as possible, it's looked at as unkept. But that's you. That's who you are, right? In society, we those people who have that kind of texture, they've been made to feel outed and needing to fit into white culture and having to change themselves in order to be a part of the society. It's really sick. And even amongst ourselves, we have identity issues and trying to just figure out who we are and feeling beautiful about ourselves. We go through different stages of understanding self-love, and it comes after all of the degradation subliminally from the media and the underrepresentation that we don't see. And then when we do see images of our women, we see them as in the worst light that they can possibly be viewed in. And it's not our people who are putting these images out, it's other people who are not a part of us, and people who they who may look like us, but their hearts are not with us, right? Why is this happening? Ask yourself why, and why aren't enough people talking about it and saying, why are these people doing this to them? Why is the world doing this to us? Because the whole world is complicit, right? So this is what has to stop, and we're putting a stop to it now, and that's what the energy is happening. That's why people are talking about Black Lives Matter. And then when the energy started to shift towards us, look who tried to co-opt it. Other people, right? Look what's going on in the Capitol. It's not our people storming the Capitol, it's other people who feel entitled to land that never belonged to them. Do you even know that? Like, think about that. Even growing up, I went to school in a pretty much segregated community because it was segregated through money. So when you have if black folks have a little bit of money and they go and live amongst white folks, you're gonna only see white folks. So they know how to segregate stuff through gentrification. And all they teach their children is how they conquered everything. That's their history. You never learn black history in a white school. I didn't. They teach about the European wars and how they conquered the world. And they're proud of it. Why? Why? You have a warring spirit. That's nothing of soul nature. And if you are identified as Caucasian and you're trying to bring yourself into soul energy, you have to reconcile this past generational trauma that your people caused the rest of the world. And a lot of people are not going to want to hear this truth. They want to bypass it and get to the Christ consciousness. But you still have to atone for every ancestral deed because we all do. You can't step out of that. So we have to experience the pain of our ancestors through the 3D reality that we've been existing in. Right? And then we walk around and then they try to cover it up by changing the history books, saying that our people were indentured servants instead of what they were, slaves. Bypass the fact that they were out there whipping their asses for nothing, raping them, forcing them to rape each other, forcing families apart, creating generational traumas that still to this day exist because when you still see people in the community, they don't even know how to love each other because of the generational traumas of the family separations, right? They don't know how to get to the bottom of that. The hypersexuality because we were bred like animals. And then there's no reparations on the table. You don't want to talk about that. Everybody wants to pickpocket from us and then don't say anything about how you can redeem and make us whole as a community. This has got to stop. So since no one has the authority to do that here on this planet, energetically we have to do that spiritually because that's where we have our power, right? And I think that's what when we call our authenticity back to ourselves, going back to the spiritual concepts of being who you are, right? That's when the power starts to draw back to those people. And honestly, when I look around, black folks are really thinking about their own issues according to them and really trying to identify themselves according to their own rules. And more power to them. And in that, we shall see how things will be equally divided. Because you can't say equality for the world and look at the poorest, most marginalized group of people across the world. Because it's not like we have government systems that we can trust to have our benefit. Even those people are co-opted by this ideologies, right? It's sad. Well, let's go back to this reading here because it's very interesting. I know I went off on a little bit of a tangent, but I had to. So let's get back to this. So that one drop rule, where a person is presumed to have descended from at least one traceable African ancestor, is considered to be fully black, colored, and Negro. So this is why our mindset is to accept anybody and let them be fully identified as fully black amongst us, and that's, even if they want to, in their own mindset, not identify with the other aspects of themselves, that's on them. But when they're around other people amongst the group, it's up for that group to, help them to identify, and help them to not negate themselves amongst them. Don't just look at them as being fully black when you know that they're not. It's not fair to them. It's not fair to you either. Okay. Now, let's get down to it. It says, for more than a century, the one drop rule has defined membership within the African American community. More recent debates surrounding the multiracial baby boom, Obama's racial identity, and the check one or more 2000 and 2010 censuses has been especially relevant for African Americans. And as these issues bring into question the persistence of the one drop rule. Prior to the 2000 census, leaders in the African American community wanted to ensure that the check one or more option would accurately count all of those African descent, thus guaranteeing the correct monitoring and protection of civil rights and federal entitlements. See, here we go. This is why everybody wants to be black. So they get them entitlements. Okay. These concerns were real, not only for African Americans, but for other communities of color as well. Giving individuals the option to choose more than one racial identity category of the United States Federal Census could threaten groups of color in terms of personal identity, see, community involvement, and political power. That's where it's important. See, they don't want people who are mixed to identify with multi-cultures so that it takes away from their status and their power, right? Wow. Scholarly explorations of mixed identity have likewise proliferated and at times provoked controversy. Within African diaspora studies, some have characterized mixed race studies as an attempt to dissolve African American identity by allowing mixedness to favor whiteness. For example, people of mixed African and European lineage may choose to distance themselves from negative associations with blackness by championing a mixed heritage identity afforded them by their European ancestry. Others fear that romanticizing mixture as a solution to present day race problems in the United States feeds into a colorblind approach to multiculturalism, which ignores institutional racism and supports white supremacist ideologies. Surely these concerns are warranted, which is why we need careful, substantive, and more critical mixed race studies. With the increase of people recognizing their blended ancestry in the 21st century has become a boom of lay and professional writing that explores mixed racial identities. Even though scholarship in the area of mixed race studies has likewise surged in recent years, most research on racial mixture and people of multi-ethnic heritage has contemporary focus and largely addresses the past 2 or 3 decades. This research project, blah, 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 we're not going to read that. Because, we already know what we really need to be studying is more of the people who are marginalized, the hidden history behind that, not more mixed history, because no, I'm sorry. Most people may look at me and want to consider me mixed, but I don't. In the sense of where my ancestry lies and how many people are my ancestors that were slaves and chattel slaves, and that maybe one or two ancestor that was some way down the line that was white, that got their way in my lineage through the brutality. I'm not really. A lot of us who are light-skinned black people from the South who have generations of, people who were mixed due to that colorism mindset, and also due to that the slave mentality mindset, and also due to rape and the trauma and all that. A lot of us, we're like not 100% African, okay? And that's just that. And in that, we still have to come through reconciling those energies among us of being products of rape or products of psychological abuse or products of everything that, the trauma of our bloodline is. It wasn't through loving relationships and partnerships that I came to be light-skinned black person. Okay? All right. So in that aspect, for me, I look at it from a sense of, we need to really tap into the story that's been more untold, because the mixed variations and people we've already been telling their stories, okay? They're already been the center of attention. And that really is something that's not cool. So let's get back to this. I want to get to a specific reading. Okay, so it says, it is often assumed in the U.S. history that the one-drop rule was ever present, yet this is not the case. Such misleading generalizations evade the historical complexity of the development of hypodescent. That's what this is called, hypodescent, and the one-drop rule. These ideas and the related social practices that helped mark and sustain the racial order deserve closer scholarly attention within discourses in the fields of African American studies, ethnic studies, and the broader U.S. history. In order to clearly understand how the United States has reached the one-drop rule, we need to examine the historical development of state legislation and social practices grounded in notions of racial mixture. The following work provides a nuanced view of this history by tracing the historical developments of hypodescent. There was greater fluidity in the mid-17th century, which solidified later in the colonial period. Strikingly, there was a return to the more fluidity marked by the Revolutionary era and its immediate aftermath. Yet, the early national period was an era marked by an increasing return to rigidity. This project utilizes archives from 5 states, Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. While I rely on an exhaustive array of documentation, newspapers, papers, etc., the bulk of my resources consists of judicial and legislative records, court cases, petitions, document deeds, wills, etc. The study is split into 2 sections, each containing 3 chapters. The first section covers the English colonial period in North America. Chapter 1 explores the social climate of Chesapeake Bay during the 17th century, where the largest sustained ethno-racial mixture took place between Africans and Europeans. Special attention is given to the colonial legislation that targeted intermarriage and sexual liaisons among Africans, Europeans, and Native Americans in the colonies of Virginia and Maryland. These laws reveal how colonial elites structure racial hierarchies. Okay, so let's keep going. I want to find a specific one. All right. There was a particular... All right, so the one-drop rule has made it possible for historians writing about African Americans to ignore and largely gloss over the topic of racial mixture and speak about all those African descent simply as Black. This can be clearly seen in countless histories focusing on African Americans during slavery that write about everyone as Black, despite many people they talk about being clearly identified as mulatto in historical records. This common practice ignores the fact that innumerable people of mixed African, European, and sometimes Native American descent never identified as Negro and let alone Black. For example, many of the Black masters or Black slave owners spoken about in historical scholarship were recognized during their times as mulattoes or people of mixed African and European descent. The following scholarship pays close attention to the ancestral nuances commonly found within African American communities by exploring the diverse heritage of those identified as mulatto. This work analyzes the laws and practices that shaped the history of mixed heritage people in the United States from colonial times up to the 1830s. There has been notable historical work in this area which provides both useful information and foundation for a project, blah, blah, blah. In 1918, historian Carter G. Woodson published an article on early intermixture between whites and Blacks. He noted several colonial laws that applied to people of mixed heritage and also provides several stories from their lives. And so let's continue here. I want to say, here we go. Here's something. Fundamentally, the advantage that Charleston light-skinned free mulattoes experienced over dark-skinned free Negroes was little different than the mulatto privilege experienced everywhere through the slave South. In all places, this privilege was based on wealth, white patronage connections, many times through familial connections to European ancestry. And Scholars like Robert Harris Jr. have noted that wealthy mulatto self-help organizations in Charleston, such as Brown Fellowship Society, Humane Brotherhood, showcase elitism of certain groups of free mulattoes, yet this did not signify a three-tier model of race relations. Harris asserts that the special treatment was based on class, not full white acceptance of a third racial caste. Berlin erred in suggesting this group of free mulattoes was a separate caste because they were governed by the same laws as all free people of African descent, continually met racial discrimination, and could fall from their elevated position if they were to lose their wealth. Certainly, free mulattoes in Charleston have gained deserved attention from scholars because they made up a significant portion of the total free population of color in the city. So then we have this whole lie that we have free people of color that were actually black people. They weren't black people. They were actually mulatto people. History has been written to favor people who were of mixed ancestry. Now, getting back to how does this coincide with also how they are turning around and twisting history in the present, I actually went to Savannah and went to see a couple historic sites. And honestly, the ancestors brought me there because, I'm into that kind of work. I like the necromancy in terms of being able to speak to the dead and doing spiritual ancestral work where you do cleansing energies with your spirit guides and stuff like that. So, and helping them elevate as well. So those ancestors pulled me there, and a lot of them were very much so locked in purgatory on these lands where they were slaves, of course, in the city of Savannah. And city Savannah, if you don't know, was the very first city to be colonized in America, the very first planned city, actually. And what I find interesting is that all cities in America are kind of made up on this same grid line type situation, which that's also dealing with ley lines and how the energy works for the Native people who were truly those people who were enslaved there. We're not going to go into those details because, ancestors had a lot to say and I was listening. So anyways, I went to Tamachichi's grave, which is the chief of the natives that were there at the time before the colonization. And it so happens to be that grave was in the middle of a park. And next to the grave there's a stone to commemorate his death and everything, which was done later. But on top of his grave, there is a big Confederate statue. And on that statue, you can see, I'll show you that statue and we can break down and see all the magic that they're siphoning even off of this one individual's shamanic energy, because usually the people who are priests are also the chiefs as well, right? Yeah. So, anywho, here's the picture. If you can see it, we'll go through it. At the bottom of the statue, you can see that the name Gordon is there. That is not the name of the person who's buried underneath the statue. Of course, why would they do that? If this is to commemorate that person, why would you put someone else's name on their grave? Doesn't make sense, right? No, it doesn't. But anyways, this is basically to honor, they said, honor a brave man, faithful and devoted officer, and to preserve his name in grateful remembrance of his fellow citizens. Oh, really? What did he really do that was so brave? To take over lands that didn't belong to him, right? So then we have this arrow. You see the arrow right here? And that wreath. That's symbolic as well for energetically siphoning energy. We're not going to get into those details. But you see the arrow. It's going up. And then you have, oh, look at that. At the top, you see that winged disc, the sun disc. That's how they're containing and transmuting the energy. We're not going to get into the magical elements and the metaphysical elements of all this because I don't have time to explain it to you guys, especially if you're not into magic. But I can show you this. And then you can see this is ancient Sumerian, ancient Babylonian, ancient Egyptian, just ancient energies, right? That's all I have to tell you. So they know that's what it is, right? And then you have these little white baby angels sitting above that, and then the world on top of it. So it's their world on top of this ancient world, essentially, right? Using this ancient energy of this chief, who I'm sure was actually a practitioner of that very ancient wisdom, power, and knowledge, of course. And then we have here, let's see, Tamachichi's grave. Let's just read what it says. They lie so much and say that he was a friend to them. Now, who, as a chief, would be a friend to people who are coming to steal their lands? I don't know. But that's what they say here, right? And then they also said it was a half breed. Let's read that. Let's see. It says Tamachichi Miko of the Yamakras, a tribe of the Creek Indian Nation, is buried in this square. And they probably put him in there. He has been called a co-founder of the Oglethorpe of Georgia. How did he co-found Georgia when he was already here? Y'all got it twisted. This is a sick society. He was a good friend to the English. to the English. Where am I? I'm just laughing. A friendship indispensable to the establishment of the colony as a military outpost against Spanish invasion. See, this is what they did. They came over here when it was already in cahoots. The Spanish and the English was already in cahoots with each other to take over all of these lands because they was all over here. They still over here, right? Okay, so they brought the English people came over here and was like, "Oh, these Spanish people coming to get y'all. Let's work in cahoots together so that we can fight them off for y'all, right? Right. Fake wars, rumors of wars, same shit they doing now, right?" So he said, "Let's come fight. Let me fight for you." And then after they fight, they end up staying their asses over here. And the only reason they can stay is because they was mixing and interbreeding. And then they had the spiritual rights to the lands through the mulattoes. Ooh, how do I know this? Because the ancestors told me. Let's keep going. Because this is why they continue to use these mulattoes and intermarriages as a prop up, especially with native people. Because you don't really see too many people who are mixed, with other ethnicities, even like, different Europeans, or they're mixed up with each other. They don't, you don't really see them talking about, how they're the exotic ones when they have Japanese and white people and, different admixtures. But it's only like when they're mixed with us that they are supposedly exotical, right? So it's us that makes them the exotic part, right? In that case, but it's not really that superficial. It really is more spiritual because it's the access to the lands, it's the access to the spiritual nature when you're admixing with the ones who originally have control over the land energy and over the spiritual energy of the land. So I remember listening to one of the presidential elections. Somebody said we're fighting for the soul of America. That's exactly what they're doing. They're fighting for the soul energy. And the soul energy only belongs to the true people. And if really and truly the true people were the people who they say they are, were the true people who are here, and they were doing all that, praying, and no offense to them, and tapping into their ancestors, wouldn't they be able to have already done something in terms of spiritual power and connecting with the ancestors, and the ancestors actually showing up for them? Well, honestly, I think that because our people are starting to try to tap in and realize that maybe we were here first, that all this energy is starting to shift and people are starting to try to suppress that and keep us from feeling like who we are and being entitled to what we are entitled to, right? How dare we? So here we go. I just had to say this because, I am a high priestess in this magic. So we need a champion in that and that. And I'm going to speak up as a high priestess and say what I know. in terms of the spiritual, metaphysical side of these things and how we can shift it. And it already has been shifted, trust me and believe me, because the energy, the planetary alignments and all these things, prophecies were already deeming this so where we were going to come into our own, wake up and realize who we are and energetically balance that shit out. Nobody can stop you from healing your karma and healing your wounds in the soul and regaining your soul energy. So there's nothing to fear here. Nothing at all. If anything, everybody's looking to us to see what is next because in terms of energetic force, it's always been a situation where for the most part, we have been directing and creating society for the other people to follow behind. I mean, look at what they're doing now. I mean, everything that we have created and they made popular by taking it and saying that they came up with it. We can go down the list of a whole bunch of stuff in society and see that. So if you want to be real, we have been pioneering and advancing the world in terms of being the visionaries and the thinkers and the thought leaders or the spiritual leaders who bring the energy into existence because we are the manifestors, right? So they use us in the past as slaves to manifest the United States of America and to manifest the colonialism, the colonies and all that stuff, building all these things for everyone else to enjoy. But it's time for us to build for ourselves. And now that we are doing that energetically, we're seeing who can't build for themselves without us building for them. And that's a problem for me as a high priestess. It's got to stop because I personally don't allow anyone to steal my energy. And I will not allow anyone to steal my family's wellspring of energy, let alone the magic that I have as birthright to tap into as a high priestess to practice the energy work that my ancestors practiced on these lands for years and years and years and years, predating their arrival. Mm, Can't nobody stop that. And I, for one, am not going to allow it to happen. So I'm saying all this to just let it be known that I went to this grave and got some insight. And I also confirmed what I'm telling you. So let's keep reading what it says. It says that he negotiated with the Oglethorpe Treaty, formally ratified by May 21st, 1733, pursuant with Georgia, was settled. Mary Musgrove, a half-breed niece of Emperor Brim of the Creek Indians, acted as an interpreter between Oglethorpe and Tomochichi and lent her great influential, okay, and signing the treaty, and the treaty is negotiated by Oglethorpe with other tribes of the Creek Nation. So you got a translator translating a treaty. What is a treaty if it's nothing but a magical document, a sealing of energies, a pact, if you will, one which makes you ultimately responsible, right? Energetically for what you sign. And a lot of times people don't even realize that laws are basically like magical documents too, that your soul is bound to. We're all bound under the law, God, under the letter of the law if you are a citizen, right? People don't realize these things, right? So in the end, they came over here with some tricks and used someone who was totally split in the scenario. Because typically, as we read, in that in that thesis that I was reading, that mulattoes were given preference, right? Not only that, you can read it. I'll put the link and read more of it because it's very interesting. Because even in that, I didn't even get to that part, but they did speak about how it was mostly the mulattoes that were free were the ones who came from um, European mothers and African fathers, and that is also something too where even in today's society you see a lot of the mulatto ones that are the ones that they prop up as the celebrities of society. Most of them are the biracial ones. Most of them may have white mothers, and that's a spiritual thing too, because You are what your mother is. Your skin, as whatever you are, you're you still have the same skin of your mom when you're born, right? So no matter what color it looks like, if you come from a lineage and it can get traced back to a white woman, then technically you are that. It's very deep. And a lot of this, it ties into the identity. And we're at an identity crisis. And identity crisis is only because it's a spiritual identity, a spiritual energy. And that's what we're waking up here. And it's harder for people, and I guarantee you it is. It's hard for people who are brought into this world through in vitro fertilization to connect to their spiritual soul and energy, because a lot of the times they don't have one. It's hard for people who connected to a lot of this trauma through slaves, whether they were white slave master, lineage, or coming from a lineage of people there is some trauma there. And there's also some atonement there that has to be done. And we're all responsible for balancing this energy on the planet if we want this planet to ascend to the next level. And we got to see all of this. So I just thought that was interesting, because we're going through a period where the souls are calling the energy to themselves. So if you are a person who's doing soul work, soul energy, or waking up to yourself, your identity, wanting to not just fit into society, because society is going to decide what it's going to be based on how we decide who we are. And that's really what it is. And the more we agree with feeling like we the bottom, feeling like they have an advantage over us, when clearly it's just energy, stolen energy that has to be returned. You call the karma, and karma is coming. Because certainly I remember I'm definitely been out here calling this karma. And I'm watching it. So let's just get the justice that we deserve, and it will come. That's all that I have to say. Those are my 2 cents in the situation. I probably won't say nothing else about it. Oh yeah. When I was in Savannah, I want to say also this. This is another thing I thought was funny, how they're covering up shit. I did a little ghost tour because I like that stuff. I'm spooky like that. I can't. I like being around ghosts, and of course I already knew the ghosts were going to be spirits of my ancestors, because those are really the only ghosts that really exist on the other side, because we are the ones who are eternal, if you really want to know. But anyways, these were slave ghosts that was stuck in this house. I'm going to show you these pictures. And then they ended up lying to the people, saying that they were butlers and cooks. No lie, look at this. This is what they say. These people were not paid to do any of the work that they did keeping this house up. And everybody in Savannah just go around, and it's not my people who like to hear this shit. They like to hear about how great life was back in those times for them, and fail to remember how fucked up it was for us. So when you talk about reaping what you sow, don't you think we deserve some type of reparations? When everybody in the world who got some type of reparations for the trauma that was inflicted upon them by their not it wasn't even just it's not even just government, it's the people around us too. You don't even have, and it's government sanctioned violence against us that happened. And we are all aware of it. It's in our history books. This is not fake news. But how can we ignore that and say, black people, get over it? Descendants of those people who are still at unrest, you know, my spidey senses tell me And they're not going to be at peace or at rest until their descendants get what they died for, because their blood was spilled for this country. For everybody to come over here and claim that they can have some type of freedom, but, yeah, there has to be justice for those spirits, because they're not going to let anybody on these lands who were not supposed to be on these lands get any kind of peace. They won't have peace until we, their descendants, get their restitution. And that is what they said to me. So that's all I have to say to y'all. Until next time, take care.